I was having a conversation with a coworker. I don't know. It's been a little while ago. When something was mentioned, I said, "Well, that's been going on since the creation of man." And and he goes, "Man wasn't created." So obviously, I had some follow-up questions. And I said, "You're not one of them that believes in evolution, are you?" He goes, "Yes, and there is no God." And I said, "Well, how did man begin evolving? Was it by lightning? Where's the proof of evolution?" He said, "Oh, it's there. Proof's all over." And I knew he was pretty good at the internet, so I said, "Why don't you pull it up real quick and show me?" Well, he wouldn't. He says it's out there. And I said, "Well, for man to evolve, there'd be something there. How long did it take?" He says, "I don't know. It's just out there." So I said, "Why is it that everything on earth has to be created? House, train, whatever. Everything has to be created." I said, "Why can't we just throw something, a bunch of stuff in the yard and it'll just create itself?" And he really didn't have any answers on that. So if we'll turn to Genesis 1:21. Genesis 1:21. See, we'll read, "And God created great whales and every living creature that moves, which the waters brought forth abundantly, after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God said, Let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beasts of the earth after his kind. And it was so." Drop down to verse 25. "And God made the beasts of the earth after his kind, the cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good." So what is evolution and where did it come from? Evolution, according to Merriam-Webster, is a scientific theory explaining the appearance of new species and varieties through the action of various biological mechanisms, such as natural selection, genetic mutation or drift, and hybridization. They explain this as cumulative inherited change in a population of organisms through time, leading to the appearance of new forms, the process by which new species or proportions of living things develop from pre-existing forms through successive generations. Where did this theory, and notice that they call it a theory and not a fact, originate from? And this is from National Geographic Classroom. Ideas aimed at explaining how organisms change or evolve over time date back to Anaximander of Miletus, a Greek philosopher who lived in the 500 BCs, noting that human babies were born helpless. Anaximander speculated that humans must have descended from some other type of creature whose young could survive without any help. He concluded that the ancestor must be a fish, since fish hatch from eggs and immediately begin living with no help from their parents. From this reasoning, he proposed that all life began in the sea. Anaximander was correct. Humans can indeed trace their ancestry back to fish. That's still quoting from National Geographic. That's not me. His idea, however, was not a theory in the scientific meaning of the word, because it could not be subjected to testing that might support it or prove it wrong. In science, the word theory indicates a very high level of certainty. Scientists talk about evolution as a theory, for instance, just as they talk about Einstein's explanation of gravity as a theory. A theory is an idea about how something in nature works that has gone through rigorous testing through observations and experiments designed to prove the idea right or wrong. When it comes to the evolution of life, various philosophers and scientists, including an 18th century English doctor named Aramus Darwin, proposed different aspects of what later would become evolutionary theory. But evolution did not reach the status of being a scientific theory until Darwin's grandson, the more famous Charles Darwin, published his famous book on the origin of species. Darwin and a scientific contemporary of his, Alfred Russel Wallace, proposed that evolution occurs because of a phenomenon called natural selection. In the theory of natural selection, organisms produce more offspring than are able to survive in their environment. Those that are better physically equipped to survive grow to maturity and reproduce. Those that are lacking in such fitness, on the other hand, either do not reach an age where they can reproduce or produce fewer offspring than their counterparts. Natural selection is sometimes summed up as survival of the fittest because the fittest organisms, those most suited for their environment, are the ones that reproduce more successfully and are most likely to pass on their traits to the next generation. This means that if an environment changes, the traits that enhance survival in that environment will also gradually change or evolve. Natural selection was such a powerful idea in explaining the evolution of life that it became established as a scientific theory. Biologists have since observed numerous examples of natural selection influencing evolution today. It is known to be just one of several mechanisms by which life evolves. For example, a phenomenon known as genetic drift can also cause species to evolve. In genetic drift, some organisms, purely by chance, produce more offspring than would be expected. Those organisms are not necessarily the fittest of the species, but in their genes, that get passed on to the next generation. That's the end of the quote from National Geographic. Remember, from the 4th century BC until the 17th century AD, scientists believed in spontaneous generation. The Greek philosopher Aristotle, 384 to 322 BC, was one of the earliest recorded scholars to articulate the theory of spontaneous generation, the notion that life can arise from non-living matter. Aristotle proposed that the life arose from non-living material if the material contained vital heat. As evidence, he noted several instances of the appearance of animals from environments previously devoid of such animals, such as a seemingly sudden appearance of fish in a new puddle of water. This theory persisted until the 17th century, when it was commonly believed that meat left out would spontaneously generate maggots. According to a National Geographic, calling it a theory means it has gone through rigorous testing. How many of you believe maggots spontaneously are generated by leaving meat out? There is evidence of adaptation in order to survive, but no evidence that birds become fish, lizards become mammals, or vice versa. In Darwin's time, they had no idea of the complex structure of the human cells. This was how cells were explained in his day by the foremost authority at the time, G.H. Lewes, who is considered as Darwin's favored authority on the subject. And he said, here we have the first recognized differentiation of structure in the appearance of a nucleus or attractive center amid the protoplasm. The nucleus is chemically different from the substance which surrounds it, and although perhaps exaggerated importance has been attributed to the nucleus and the mysterious powers that have been ascribed to it. Yet as an essential constituent of the cell, it commands attention. Indeed, according to the most recent investigations, the definition of a cell is a nucleus with surrounding protoplasm. The cell wall, or delicate investing membrane of which the cell is a closed sac, is no longer to be regarded as a necessary constituent, but only as an accessory. So the nucleus, which we now know to be the information control center of the cell containing chromosomes and much of the genetic information, billions of bits in some cases, necessary to form an organism, is of exaggerated importance, having mysterious powers. Meanwhile, the membrane is called only as an accessory. That isn't even necessary to the definition of a cell. How many of you understood that? Good, I didn't either. In his book, The Case for a Creator, former atheist Lee Strobel writes, "The 6 feet of DNA coiled inside every one of our bodies, 100 trillion cells, contains a 4-letter chemical alphabet that spells out precise assembly instructions for all the proteins which are in our bodies are made." Cambridge-educated Stephen Myers demonstrated that no hypothesis has come close to explaining how information got into the biological matter by natural means. Mr. Jackson, if you'd pass out the handouts. I think if Charles Darwin were alive today, with all the advanced studies of flora and fauna, all the discoveries since his time, and the ability to look at things from a more microscopic view, that he would argue on the side of creation. He said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Now, we'll look at the printout and ask yourself what Darwin would have thought about this occurring without a creator. Darwin only knew about the cell membrane, the nucleus, and the nucleosis. And he didn't know about any of this other stuff here. And then if you look down at the Star Wars figure down below here, it's actually bacteriophage, or better known as phage, are a type of virus that infects and replicates in bacteria to the point that the bacteria can no longer sustain itself. The phages are the most numerous and diverse entities in the biosphere. They are found wherever bacteria exists. Phages were discovered to be an antibacterial agent and were used in the former Soviet Republic of Georgia, pioneered by 2 people, I don't know how to pronounce their names, during the 1920s and 1930s for treating bacterial infections. They had widespread use, including treatment of soldiers in the Red Army. However, they were abandoned for general use in the West for several reasons. Antibiotics were discovered, marketed widely. They were easier to make, store, and prescribe. Medical trials of phages were carried out back, but a basic lack of understanding raised questions about the validity of these trials. Published in research in the Soviet Union was mainly in the Russian or Georgian languages, and for many years was not followed internationally. Bacteriophages are composed of proteins that enclose a DNA or RNA genome, and many have structures that are either simple or elaborate. Their genomes may encode a few as 4 genes and as many as hundreds. Phages replicate within the bacterium following the injection of their genome into a cytoplasm. Counteracting bioweapons and toxins, government agencies in the West have for several years been looking to Georgia and the former Soviet Union for help exploiting phages for counteracting bioweapons and toxins such as anthrax and botulism. Developments are continuing among research groups in the U.S. Other uses include spray application in horticulture for protecting plants and vegetables produced from decay and the spread of bacterial diseases. Now if we'll turn to Job 28. And we'll go verses 24 through 26. For he looks to the ends of the earth to see under the whole heavens, to establish a weight for the wind, and a portion of the waters by measure. When he made a loft for the rain and a path for the thunderbolt. In the Signature of God by Arthur Grant Jeffrey, he said, it is an intriguing statement that the Bible reveals that the winds are governed by the weight, a fact that scientists have only determined in the last century. How could Job have known that the air and the wind patterns are governed by actual weight? Meteorologists have found that the relative weight of the wind and water greatly determine the weather patterns. We have much evidence that God is the creator of all that we are able to come to know. Each thing was brought out to have it react in the way God intended, from phages that destroy bacteria, blood that coagulates, so you don't die from a cut. Wind that follows a law and a pattern, and DNA that governs what we look like. Our intellectual capacity and other characteristics passed down from our tribe or clan. Now the final verse. Turn to Romans 1, verses 18 through 22. Romans 1, 18 through 22. For the wrath of God is relevant from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the right in righteousness, because we may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Verse 21, because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools.